As Dean of the Jepson School of Leadership Studies, it is my privilege to welcome you to the first session of the 1999-2000 Jepson Leadership Forum. Our theme this year is Values, Religion, and Leadership, and we are very fortunate to have four distinguished individuals from the Richmond community to begin our conversation. As you will readily see from your program notes, Dean Kinney, Professor al-Hibri, Reverend Campbell, and Dr. Spiro bring an extraordinary experience and perspective to this evening's exploration of pluralism in public life, culture, and faith. To moderate the conversation and the question and answer period to follow, it is my pleasure to introduce Lynn Neary, National Public Radio's religion correspondent. Ms. Neary's award-winning career with NPR has included weekend host of All Things Considered, newscaster for Morning Edition, anchor for Talk of the Nation, and co-host of Radio Expeditions. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists and moderator to the Jepson Leadership Forum.
Wonderful to be here. When I was a little girl and my mother used to have parties, she would say to me, I'd go out into the kitchen and say, what can I do? And she'd say, go out there and keep the conversation going, keep the conversation going. So I guess that's how you end up being in my position tonight. Although I think with this group here, having spent just a little bit of time with them, it's not going to be a very big challenge to keep the conversation going. I think it'll be a challenge just to do it in the amount of time that we have allotted to us. Let me just briefly tell you who our panelists are. Dr. Azizah al-Hibri is a professor of law at the University of Richmond, an internationally known expert on Muslim women law and religion, Islamic jurisprudence, feminist theory, and human rights. Dr. Jack Spiro is the director of the Center for Judaic Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. The Reverend Benjamin Campbell, pastoral director of Richmond Hill, an ecumenical Christian community and retreat center, and Dr. John William Kinney, dean of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. I'd like to just tell you what we're going to be doing. It's going to be a very interesting program, I think. I am going to be going through and reading specific case studies that have been submitted by students here and some faculty. And then I will ask the panel to respond to those cases. These cases deal with religion in the public place and questions of pluralism in our society. We'll do that for about 45 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to you, the audience, for some question and answers. When you do join in the discussion, we ask that you please be sure to use your mic, and I may have to interrupt you if you don't, because this is being recorded and it will eventually be broadcast on WCVE-FM, the local public radio station, the Central Virginia Public Radio, on Friday, October 1st at 1 p.m. So all of you are going to be on the radio if you talk up, so use those mics. Let me get started now, reading the first case. This is a case based on a news story that's been in the news very recently. We thought we might start out with that because some of you may have heard of this. And it's a case that was submitted by Charles Seidman. And the source was the Baptist Prayer Book Provokes Jewish Anger, based on an article in the Washington Post. Timed to coincide with this fall's Jewish High Holy Days, the Southern Baptist International Mission Board launched a new campaign aimed at converting Jews to Christianity. A booklet was distributed to over 40,000 churches and offered very specific tips on how to evangelize Jews during the 10 holy days when Jews are sensitized to spiritual matters. The booklet has created a great deal of tension between Jewish and Baptist leaders. Baptists state that the Bible is clear and that Christ's followers must share the gospel with Jews and other non-Christians. Jewish leaders accept the Baptist goal of converting Jews, but many Jews are offended because the booklet has targeted the most sacred Jewish holidays and is attempting to use them as a conversion tool against Jews. Dr. Kinney, let me start with you. As a Christian,
very good.
As a Christian, how would you reconcile that central element of Christian faith to evangelize with what may be an ethical or moral imperative to respect another person's faith?
Well, I would have to say that I would have to begin with a consideration of what it means to evangelize. Even in the statement, if I heard you correctly, it said that Christ's followers have an obligation to share the gospel, to share the good news of God's self-giving love for the sake of all humanity and creation. And one of the things that I would think, and I would like to hear those who are on the other side being converted, how they would interpret it, but I think it really for me becomes a Christian issue in the sense that it's a call for us to revisit what the call of a Christian is. And that is whether or not the way in which we witness to God's graciousness violates the very nature of that graciousness. That is, to the extent that the way we witness automatically diminishes, belittles, and devalues other persons, makes them less than us because of who they are, rather than being the voice of the gospel that would help people to understand the transformative loving power of a God who loves the cosmos.
Dr. al-Hibri, you should know that the Southern Baptists have created a similar prayer guide for Ramadan, aimed at Muslims. Do you think it's wrong to target a religious group for conversion at a time when members of that religious faith are immersed in spiritual matters of their own?
Not necessarily. That is a matter of style. We might talk more about the content of the issue. Some of this has happened to me personally, not the pamphlet, but whenever I appear on television, I usually get communications from people around the country telling me about Christianity, so that with the idea that if I knew enough, I would convert. And some of these things that I receive are fine. They're just telling me about Christianity. They do not know that I grew up studying Christianity. Some of them are not as fine because they have a very negative misunderstanding of Islam. And when they're comparing their religion to Islam, they're relying on that stereotype. So it depends on what is being said, how it is being said. I believe in First Amendment rights. I believe people should be able to say whatever they please. I believe in civility too, that it should be said that way. If they say it in any other way, if they're aggressive about it, first of all, I don't think that's what Christianity is about. To turn aggressive. I think there is the whole issue of being neighborly. There's the whole issue of teaching by example. And love is not coercive. But I have no problem with people doing this. If they're doing it, my feeling is that they need to look into themselves and see if they are really exemplifying the values of Christianity.
Dr. Spiro.
I thought you were going to get to me.
I had to.
I think I probably take a slightly different view than many of my colleagues, and some of them I know you read their statements in the newspaper, and there have been statements like that all over the country. And whenever I hear anything like that, and this is not the first time, I always thank God that we had secularists who framed the Constitution and the First Amendment, because that puts statements like that, pamphlets like that, I think, in their right context, which is, you're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine. God help us if any opinion like that ever became, quote, established. And since we do have a clause in the Constitution which is disestablishment, we are protected from statements becoming statements or sources of power, which is what could get us into trouble. It's an opinion, and being a Jew who has studied Jewish history, This is nothing new to me. It's been going on for centuries and centuries. In fact, most of the time, as in Spain and other countries of Europe, conversion was forced upon Jews, either to convert or to die. And that wasn't much of a choice. Many of them did die. Many of them were martyrs. But as I see it, this time of the year is a time of very thoughtful introspection. It's probably a pretty good time, because there's 10 days during the year of the High Holy Days are a time when we're doing a lot of interior thinking, and it's something to think about. Not to think about converting, but think about what that idea means within the Christian, not even the Christian, but in the Baptist context. And I do think, and I may be wrong, and Ben and others can correct me, but as I see it, it's just a fulfillment of what I've read, maybe superficially, in the New Testament. As Ben told me, it's in the book of Matthew specifically, where the mission is given to all new Christians to go out and evangelize, to spread the good word. Gospel means good news. Evangel means good news. And this is the good news. And that's part of the mission of being a Christian from the point of view of the Southern Baptists. So it doesn't offend me at all. It's just another person's opinion about the love of their own religion and wanting it to be shared by others. There were a couple of other things that offended me a lot more, and that was several years ago when I think it was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention who said that God doesn't hear the prayers of Jewish people. And that was a very negative remark. There was no love in that. This is at least something that's very loving. And secondly, what bothered me more than anything else was when they came out with the statement that women should submit to their husbands. That was very disturbing.
I have to say that one of the rabbis that I interviewed on this story, who had read the pamphlet, said that it was written very lovingly, but he also said it was the most offensive piece of literature, religious literature he had ever read, because it did make some of the kinds of statements that you just referred to about Judaism, that there is no basis for Jews to be forgiven, was one of the statements in this pamphlet.
Well, I think that has to be true on the basis of the orthodox position of Christianity, and please disagree with me, but as I see it, the only way to salvation, like hearing the prayers of a Jew. If God doesn't hear the prayers, then how can you be saved? And if you can't be saved, then that means eternal damnation. So when I first came to town 27 years ago, I arranged an interfaith meeting, seminar with Baptists and Jews, and I remember when, after it was all over and I thought it was successful, a person came up to me as a Baptist and said, "I want to introduce myself. I am a complete Jew." And I wasn't sure what he meant by that. Did you convert or what? No. As a Christian, he is a complete Jew, which means that I am an incomplete Jew.
Well, and
from that point of view. From that point of view, I understand it. I appreciate it. It's his opinion. And we live in a free society, thank God.
Let me ask you, Reverend Campbell, do you see this as a matter purely of faith, or is there a lesson here in terms of our pluralistic society and how people of different faiths should be expected to get along and relate to each other?
Well, I really do come at it, I hope, from a Christian point of view, and my pluralism is a Christian pluralism. It's the pluralism that was, I think, recommended by Jesus when he said to the woman that he was speaking to that the time is coming and now is when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And he was talking, therefore, about the primary place of the correct spirit in the determination of correct religion. And therefore, the question that one would ask about this kind of a statement by the Southern Baptists is, what is the spirit of it? Now, we can affirm what appears to be a spirit of love, but there's also a tremendous spirit of arrogance in it. And I kind of wish, if I'd heard them praying for their own conversion as well as for the Jews' conversion, I would have felt a lot better about it. Seriously, because this is a continuing business, this transformation of the human being. And we are all seeking it, and Christians no less than anyone else need to be seeking it. I will say one thing: I think prayer is always helpful, and that for the Southern Baptists to advocate prayer at this time and prayer for the Jews is a good idea. If their prayer needs to be informed, I'm sure God will respond to them and help them have a broader understanding of the absolute wonder of the holidays that are being celebrated at this time, and of the importance of the wonderful revelation that is present to the Jewish people.
Did you want to say
I
something?
just wanted to say, I mean, the issue is also broader than just what is happening in the context you mentioned. The question really is, what if you truly believe that somebody else is engaging in an act which is very detrimental to their well-being? What is your moral obligation towards them? Do you say this is a pluralistic society, if you want to walk off the cliff, it's okay, you know, it's not my business? Or do you have a moral responsibility to go and try to tell them, look, I think this is where it is at? How much of this can you do before it becomes offensive, and how much of it is okay? But it seems to me there must be a realm where it's still okay to talk about these things before it becomes offensive. And drawing the line is the real issue.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in this case, that's of course the argument that the Southern Baptists do make, which is that this is their moral obligation, it's at the heart of their faith. And at this point, it's in a prayer guide. It isn't really, as you said, causing any necessarily direct conflict, perhaps causing offense. But at times, we know in our society that somebody's faith, somebody's belief can create conflict. I'm going to move on to another case, which I think expands on what we've been talking about.
Before you leave that case,
Hold on a second. I told you that it wasn't going to be a problem getting them talking. Okay.
I'm not trying to sound like Rabbi Goody Two-Shoes and give a nice conclusion to this, but I think this kind of a thing, since it got so much notoriety, really could encourage conversation. And I would love that in our community and communities all over the country. NPR can reach the whole country. To sit down with Baptists, Jews and Baptists, rabbis and Baptist ministers, and talk about this.
Yes,
what does it really mean to be a complete Jew? What does it mean to be a complete human being in a world of such diversity, in a country of such diversity?
Well, again, Rabbi Jack Moline, who I interviewed, said it had started many interesting conversations with his Christian friends, but he said he thought there were better ways to begin dialogue.
The two questions I want to ask that are theological questions are, first, is the Christian's approach to another person one which denies the validity of what that person has found to be true about God, or affirms it and attempts to build on it? That's one of the questions that's asked, and that seems to be negated by the particular presentation that the Southern Baptists made. And I forgot the other question.
I think it is important in terms of however I engage in conversation with someone else, whether my conceptual framework, my theological framework, and my presupposition inherently negates that person because I approach them in a hierarchical reality wherein their very being is beneath mine, based upon a superior position I maintain because of a relationship with God. And is that fundamental presupposition, in fact, totally contradictory to the very substance of what we profess Christianity to be? Have we not witnessed to that which our faith calls us to transcend?
Well, I think that's beautiful, but there's one little problem, and you use the word fundamental, and I'd like to just build on that word for 1 second. And that is, whenever we're talking about the fundamentalist context, we're talking about absolutism, aren't we? We're talking about having the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And therefore, you are going to be less of a human being if there are things you believe which are false, or if the way you live is false.
Well,
Go ahead.
and I think you would get into a debate about how we understand fundamentals. What the fundamentals of the faith? Are they doctrinal absolutes, which may have a cultural root, may be temporally limited, but are there an issue of qualitative relationship and what is fundamental to a faith? Even in our God so loved the world. That's what's fundamental, that he gave.
Well, there are
And then if you go further and say, whosoever believeth, then when we rest with, what does it mean to believe? The issue for me at some point becomes the recovery of oneness and, shall we say, intimacy with the eternal, rather than assent to someone else's proposition about the nature.
Dr. al-Hibri,
yes.
I'm going to let you be the last word on this
Okay,
one.
let me just add something about this in terms of dignity and respect. If somebody is talking to me and they think, for example, because they don't know me, they have not been neighbors with me, they have not interacted with me, which is to build on your dialogue idea, and they believe that I'm a devil worshiper, it's harder for them to respect me and treat me with dignity than if they talk to me and find out that my beliefs are not that different from them. So I think one way to break the cycle of unhappiness is for all of us to talk to each other, to be neighborly, something in all our religions, to get to know each other so that the other is not an other with a big O, somebody who's stereotyped and reified and alienated from our existence. The other thing that I have been seeing in television, and it bothers me, and I don't know who started it, and I'm not at all accusing the Baptist of doing this, but it's something I just need to get out of our system, my system, is how we sit and count how many followers we have, our religion has. It's like market share, you know? What is going on? What do I care if there are like umpteen million Muslims if they're not good enough Muslims? What if there are so many Christians or Jews, but they're not really true to Christianity or Judaism? Why is number so important? I think we really need to rethink these issues.
I have an answer to that, but I'm not sure if I should. No, but I would say in terms of Muslims, Muslim groups will put out numbers, and part of the reason for that is that we're not just talking about religion. We're also talking about numbers equal power, and numbers equal power in terms of influence on what may happen in Washington. And there's often great debate about numbers because, and this I noticed from being a reporter in Washington and from hearing from different interest groups. Because I cover religion, I hear from interest groups that are religiously based.
That's why I said market share. It's repulsive. That's not what religion is.
But it is part of what is going on. Let's move on to another case, because what we're talking about here now, I think, is the changing landscape of religion in this country, the fact that we one time thought of ourselves as, well, for instance, Episcopalians being perhaps the dominant religion. They were never dominant, but they certainly had a lot of influence. But in terms of numbers, now what we hear all the time is there are more Muslims than Episcopalians, and isn't that an example of how our religious landscape has changed? In fact, it is changing, and I think as a reporter, I know that a lot of the tensions about this sometimes get played out in a school setting. So let's go to a case that takes place in a school setting. And this was submitted by Bethany Smoser, and she is a student in Doug Hicks' Leadership and Religious Values class. In Blue Ash, Ohio, the discussion surrounds suspending classes for religious observances. The Sycamore School District is facing a challenge in federal court because it closed school for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The American Civil Liberties Union filed suit claiming that this policy discriminates against other faith minorities in the district. Public schools may close on religious holidays only if they have a non-religious reason for doing so, according to the ACLU, which notes the closings violate existing policy to close when absenteeism rate climbs to 18% above the normal rate. Although the absentee rate did not reach that high, the district claims that the days were not productive school days, no tests were given, no new materials could be covered. Muslim and Hindu parents got upset with the system that observes the holidays of some minorities, but not others. Dr. al-Hibri, how do school officials determine what religions should be accommodated?
Or whether they should be.
Or whether they should be at all?
And for a long time in this country, the question was whether they should be. And we prided ourselves basically on secularism. And we tried to define secularism as if it's a neutral position, which is above all religions, right? And so we're not teaching the children about any one religion, we're above that. The fact is that when you say you're neutral among all religions and you don't teach any spiritual values to the children, then what you have done is you've taught them secularism. And that is another point of view. So actually, our schools are taking a point of view vis-à-vis religion, and that is secularism. And we're seeing some of the results of that. I'm unhappy with the fact that our students can go to school and not be brought up in their education with spiritual values that are very important for the rest of their lives. We're seeing the results of that. Which religions should be honored in school or observed and which not? I think we have a constitution which says we cannot establish a religion, and that means we have to sit together, discuss these issues, and make it as inclusive and yet productive for the students as possible. You know, there has been a lot of discussion whether we should, in our buildings, have the 10 Commandments. Sure. And also some other statements about morality and spirituality from other religions, rather than say, let's throw religion out the window. It doesn't work because it produces a moral vacuum and the society will pay for it later.
This also comes up when you start discussing school prayer, and one of the things that I've heard from many people of different faiths is that who oppose the idea of school prayers. One of the reasons they do is the whole question of whose prayer will it be, and then even if you rotated, say, through 5 or 6 different religions and they each had a day to say a prayer, or a generic prayer. Most people of faith don't like the idea of generic prayer at all. But Dr. Spiro, I'd like to get you in on this discussion. I grew up in the New York metropolitan area, and the public schools there were always off for the Jewish holidays because there were many Jewish people living in that area. What do we do now that we're seeing in many school districts? There may be a number of Muslims. Should there be a holiday for students to observe?
Well, as I understand the case you're talking about the school closing because of a religious holiday. Is that right? So I would simply go back to the ACLU's position, which is my position too, and that is if you're going to lose too many students, but even more important from an educator's point of view is how many teachers will you be losing? Because if you lose just one Jewish teacher for Jewish holidays, then that's 25, 30 kids perhaps, multiplied by the number of classes during the day, who are going to be bereft of a teacher, then you have to go for a substitute. So I think it's needs to be based simply on the secular reason of the percentages that would be lost for a school to stay closed. Certainly not because of a religious observance as the reason. The reason is only absenteeism and nothing else. There's no reason for it to be anything else.
Well, Jack, I think that's a little extreme, actually. I think that the secular reason is very important, but I think that what Azizah said about the business of honoring religion is terribly important for public education right now. And I think that that's one of the things that we've really learned, there may well be a difference between establishing religion and honoring religion. And I've spent a lot of time in classrooms, as you have, over the last couple of decades, and I know there are some teachers who really know how to honor religion in a classroom in a way that is respectful of all the children in a classroom. It means that they become listeners quite often to the spirituality of the children and give them a chance to share. But I would love to see a situation where the schools really expected that children who were religiously observant would take a couple of religious holidays off a year, and then the answer of whether you had to close the school or not would probably be a percentage question. But the understanding that this is a part of what we're trying to engender among our children. Just to give you an example to show that this thing cuts a number of ways, I was acquainted with a couple of teachers over the last decade who were very observant Episcopalians for whom Good Friday was an important religious holiday that they had always celebrated. And they were informed by their school systems, Henrico was really quite egregious on this for quite a while, that they were not allowed to take a day off, even of personal leave, before a holiday. And since the school system in Virginia has decided that the real Holy Week is the week after Easter. It became that Good Friday was strictly a violation of contract for a teacher to leave. And I know one teacher whose job was cast in great jeopardy over this issue. So it is a problem.
I just want to say something. I sound like an immigrant. I am an immigrant. I came from Lebanon when Lebanon was a fun country to live in, where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived happily together. And I went to an evangelical school. That's why I studied the Bible for 12 years. I also acted in the Christmas play. I was Mary and an angel. I refused to be the shepherd. I want to tell you, in all these times, I really never felt put upon by the Christians in my school. It was just something we did together. The teachers were very respectful of my religion. In Bible class, we could talk about Islam. I could express my views, and my teachers, who were American, some of them, would answer back, and we'd have a very nice dialogue. And we went to chapel each day, and at times I was asked to give the sermon. And it was a generic one, something that was not offensive for anybody. I think it can be done. I don't know why we're having so much difficulty with it in this country, but we need to give it further thought. I want to say one more thing about absences and holidays. And that is, we should not be thinking with the mentality of the 19th and 20th century. We're at the gates of the 21st. If a teacher needs to be absent for a religious holiday, let him or her be absent. Mm-hmm. When I have to be absent, you know what I do? If I cannot do it as a makeup, I videotape the lecture. And my students can come to class at the required time and see it. We can make some adjustments, some sacrifices, so that people could really enjoy a spiritual renaissance. And I hope that's what we'll do. Did you want to answer?
Well, I would something a little differently, and I would agree wholeheartedly that the issue of formation of persons within spiritual values is essential to the educational system. I don't think you necessarily do that through prayer. You raise the question for me, whose prayer is it? It's the prayer of the one who's praying. When I'm praying, you can't stop me from praying. And the other thing is, I think it's a statement of extreme presumptive arrogance to hear things like they're taking God out of the school. How do you take God out of anything? And in a very real sense, I remember when I was teaching in high school, moments that I used to have my back to the class, writing on the board, and I would be praying. I can remember dealing with a student and discerning a wounded learner and not being able to literally say, let me pray with you. But in that moment of piercing glance and penetration, it was a spiritual moment. It was my moment of faith. And in a very real sense, I think sometimes it's those of us who profess to be the most faithful are the ones to say they've taken God out of school. Then that means none of us goes to school. And I believe that. And another thing, I think it has to do with the quality of a classroom. When I talk about a spiritual presence in the classroom, I think you need to study world religions. I think you need to be conscious of different patterns of devotion and discussing the principles of the divine and spirituality. But I think it's also how you set an environment where, if I would, I'm getting my thing I wanted to say on the first one in, that at some point, I don't have to know you to determine whether or not you have value. I don't have to hear what you believe about Islam and then say, oh, she's not a devil worshiper. My own faith assigns value to you. Maya Angelou says, when I discovered who I truly was in God, everybody else started looking differently. And in a very real sense, I don't need to talk to you. I don't need to say anything to you. An assumption of my own depth of spirit is that I see it in you, even if you don't even, if it's not even visible to anyone else. because, and I'm going to say this, I happen to be a Baptist Christian. Because I am a Baptist Christian, I see value in you. And some of y'all, you've heard it, I don't know, I think it's either letters to Timmy, Victoria, you might remember that there's the story of this woman who was a school teacher, and she had a young man in her class who was a very poor student. His personal hygiene left something to be desired. He was one of those students that honest teachers have to admit that at the beginning of the year they would check their roll and hope he was not in their class. This young man was in her class, and so he was doing poorly, butt of the children's jokes. One Christmas, the children brought gifts to her. And everybody brought these nice gifts, but Timmy didn't have anything to bring. He brought a jar of toilet water where the gold in the bottle had flecked out into the bottom, and it was more alcohol than fume, and a rhinestone brooch with all the stones out of it. After when he brought his gifts, everybody laughed. And she, having the sensitivities of a teacher, put the brooch on and put the toilet water on. And after everyone else left, she noticed he was still in the room, and she said, "It's time to go, Timmy, let's go." He said, "But I need to tell you something. You sure made this room smell like my mama today." And she went back and checked and found out that his mother had died when he was 5. He was now 9 years old, being raised by a single parent alcoholic father. And she said that Christmas she went home, got down on her knees, and recovered why she was a teacher in the first place. And she said, after Christmas, my students walked back to a new classroom and a new teacher. Because when they walked into Miss Johnson's room, from that day forward, they walked into kingdom space where everybody was somebody. And I think that was the beginning of the teaching of religion in that classroom.
It's a wonderful story. I'm going to put a close to this with just one comment, which is, the U.S. Department of Education has informed schools, has sent out a pamphlet to schools, did it a couple of years ago, letting them know just how much religion can be allowed within the schools under the First Amendment. And I've interviewed people who work with school districts where conflict or fights break out over these issues, who say that frequently part of the reason that the conflicts break out is because administrators sometimes have mishandled a situation that didn't need to become a conflict because they didn't understand that certain things are allowed within the school under our First Amendment rights. And so part of it is people educating themselves on what we can do versus what we cannot do under the First Amendment. Moving on to the next case, which was submitted by Meena Venkatarama, also a student here at the University of Richmond. The 2000 presidential campaign is underway, and candidates are playing the religion card, affirming his or her Christian roots. The United States is growing in its religious diversity along with its ethnic makeup, yet candidates are using religiously loaded language that promotes morals and values for a society that suggests of moral decay and widespread ills. George W. Bush describes his decision to recommit my life to Jesus Christ. Vice President Al Gore describes himself as a child of the kingdom and a person of strong faith. Candidates who seek to occupy the most visible and public leadership role in the world thrust religion, which was once considered a private issue, into the public arena. Reverend Campbell, what would you say are the implications of using religious-based language that is particularly centered on Christianity by our presidential candidates?
Well, I think Jesus' teaching on this is by their fruits you shall know them. And if we continue to... If we continue to have presidential elections run on the basis of the least significant language that will get votes, and the least serious consideration of the issues of a country that is in dire straits, a country which has not faced any of its major issues for the last 20 years while we've been on this enormous kind of economic glut. I think that, that this is just one more ploy of people who are unwilling to talk about serious things. And I find it personally offensive as a Christian. I think it devalues the words of my Lord. I think you show me what you have to do, you don't talk about it, and I'll watch your actions.
But does religion have a role to play in our political discourse?
You know, those of us who really are interested in religion are interested in the actual substance of it, not whether I can use the code words of it in order to gain votes. And in terms of political discourse, I'd love to hear some discussion about what, if George wants to talk about his religion or Al Gore wants to talk about his religion, I'd love to hear him say how he applies some of the teachings of Jesus or of the Hebrew prophets to some of the situations in America today. That might be instructive. He could do that in a respectful fashion, and it might well deal with some of the serious matters of our society. But that's religion. Religion is the substance of the teaching, not the code words that represent a verbal profession of faith. Anybody can do that. Jesus had a lot to say about that. Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he or she who does the will of my Father which is in heaven. This is about substance, not about code words.
Dr. Spiro.
I don't know. I find myself approaching your questions more like a historian than a theologian. And I can't help but reflecting on the past 200 or more years in our society. America does have a religion. And it was Robert Belloc quite a long time ago in the 1960s who, he didn't coin the term, but he identified that religion as civil religion, calling it civil religion, which is not the opposite of uncivil religion. But he was written in many, many scholarly works on the characteristics of civil religion. I think one of them is, I think Dwight Eisenhower was a perfect representative of civil religion. Eisenhower, you may recall, said, every American should believe in something, and I don't care what it is. And one of the characteristics of civil religion is not to get too specific. No, it's true. If you remember back to Jimmy Carter, I mean, people were worried about Jimmy Carter because he was getting a little too specific. They were worried about Kennedy for the same reason. He might get a little too specific in terms of papism or Catholicism. So we have to be very, very vague, fuzzy, but to be religious is to be patriotic within this context of civil religion. It goes back to the very beginning of our nation. Absolutely. Civil religion, biblical images of all kinds from the very, very beginning, justifying our existence from a transcendent point of view with the idea of manifest destiny, filled with that. And if you look at one of our most sacred documents, the dollar bill, you will see that broken pyramid, and you will see two phrases on the broken pyramid most people can't read. One of those is that this is the Novus Ordo Seclorum. This is the new order of the ages, which is sort of a secular humanistic idea, but the other one is Annuit Coeptus, which means he favors our undertaking. That is civil religion. And then take out one of our other metal amulets, a penny, a nickel, or whatever, and we will see in God we trust. Now, don't get too specific. That's okay. And that's what campaigners and that's what candidates have been doing since George Washington. There's nothing new in this. They have to do it. They don't have much of a choice. But it's not enough now, it seems, just to be seen by a church. You have to also be seen coming out of church.
Before the other two of you join in, I'm going to read another case because it's simply going to expand on this whole question of religion and politics, and then we can just get going. This was submitted by Jim Shatine, also a student here. Missouri, like many other states, has the death penalty. In January 1999, Governor Mel Carnahan, a Democrat, commuted to a life sentence the death penalty of Darrell Meese, convicted of the shooting death of a 19-year-old paraplegic. The governor explained that he arrived at his decision because he received an extraordinary plea from Pope John Paul II. The governor describes it as an act of mercy. Carnahan, a Democrat, is running for the U.S. Senate. He is challenging Republican Senator John Ashcroft, himself a former governor. Ashcroft has criticized Carnahan, noting that a plea from a religious leader, no matter how well-intentioned, should not be allowed to change a court decision or order. The controversy concerning this issue has spilled over into other issues in Missouri politics. The governor supports abortion rights. Some citizens might be wondering how he would react if the Pope called on him to condemn abortion. Dr. Kinney, Dr. al-Hibri, should political leaders listen to their religious leaders?
Let me join this question with the earlier one we were talking about. Generally, I'm very comforted when I meet someone and find out that he or she is a person of faith. That sort of puts us in the same arena. Regardless of what they believe, we generally believe in the same picture, big picture. We generally believe that God created us. We're not descendant of monkeys, for example. So that is really a very important thing for me to feel. So to that extent, knowing that George Bush is a person of faith and takes his faith seriously, or Al Gore, all the others, this is very comforting. The problem, though, is that I think if they were to themselves practicing their faith, that's fine, but then we get into what Ben called code words, that they're trying to say this and use it for political reasons. They are signaling something. When they do that, I get concerned. I get concerned, for example, when one religious leader can influence the thought of one political leader in this country, but other religious leaders do not have similar access. I'm not necessarily being unduly concerned. While we have talked about the fact that in this country, freedom of religion has always been a very important value, and in fact is reflected in our Constitution, I'd like to mention to you one additional fact, which is that Muslims in this country are not new arrivals. They're not immigrants. They have been in this country for a long, long time. They helped build the economy of this country, but they were not able to practice their religion. They were forced to convert to another religion, Christianity, by force. Islam was written about in the 17th century as the religion of infidels, and our prophet was basically called the impostor. I'm talking about the era of slavery. There were sometimes more slaves than free people in a town, and yet these people were not able to practice their religion freely. Things have improved because we in America are taking our Constitution more and more seriously, and we are really trying to live by this idea of freedom of religion. Muslims do not feel that they have reached that point of true plurality in this society yet. In particular, you'll probably hear about a rally in front of the White House in the next 2-3 days, I don't know when. But it is because of a law on the books which affects Muslims more than others in its application, and it denies them due process, something that all of us take for granted. It's about the secret evidence rule, and you can read about that in the papers when it comes up. So Muslims are very concerned about their right to worship in this country, about their right for actual full political representation. And I'm pretty sure that if a religious Muslim leader from abroad calls a politician here and says, I'd like you to consider not doing the following because of my opinion, it will not be looked at positively because we are still struggling here with the image of Islam among the populace. So I am concerned. While I appreciate spirituality quite a bit, while I'm very happy that George Bush is hopefully a good Christian, and so is Al Gore and so on, when it comes into the political arena, I have to be concerned to some extent about how this will affect the access of Muslims and their equal rights, given that we have problems already.
And as a Muslim, how do you react when you hear that a politician responded to a plea from the Pope in such an active
You know, I'll have to tell you that my general response to any one of these actions is to ask for a meeting, to start a dialogue and to make them understand our point of view and increase the access rather than deny it altogether. That would be my approach.
I would just express a concern when religion becomes the handmaiden of politics, and religion has a pragmatic function of expediency. And I think when we deal with civil religion, that for expediency, you have to relate a religious tradition to the civil religion. And as a result, the religious tradition loses its capacity to offer a moral critique of a culturally defined and socially sanctioned pattern of life. And in the end result, your allegiance is not to your religion, but to a pattern. And the function of church and religion becomes therapeutic, I think, wherein people want from religion the psychological reassurance of the legitimacy of their own happiness.
Oh, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. Civil religion is a nostrum. That's what it's meant to be. It's not meant to be a critique. You and I are meant to be the critics. And thank God we are independent and free of establishment so we can do it.
Yeah. Now, but the question is, the question for me is how do I feel when politicians...
They'll always do it. I mean, I'm not cynical, I'm trying to be realistic.
But the second case we read, more than just espousing faith, was an example of somebody responding very directly. Actually, I was there, I saw it happen, I didn't know it was happening at the moment, but I did see, I was covering the Pope, I was in that church, I saw him walk over to the governor and say something, and afterwards I said, oh my God, he must have... That's when he asked him to do that. That was the moment he asked him to do that. And it was a very charged moment. You know, we had just been this beautiful service. You could almost see how it happened in that moment. But what's your reaction when it's not just a matter of saying, well, I'm a good, Catholic, or I'm a good Methodist, or whatever.
My reaction is not to vote for him.
Yeah.
That's why this is a democracy.
Why would you vote for somebody that did that?
Well, if that's really true. And I'm not so sure, I don't know whether it's true or not. When it comes to politicians running for office, they know what they have to say. And certainly you can appreciate when we hear on the commercial stations, and now we present the news in depth for the next half a minute. The more superficial and the more soundbite-ish the politician is about religion, the safer he is. And that's all we're going to hear. That's all we ever have heard. There has never been an inaugural address since the first one that Washington gave that does not refer to Almighty God or divine providence. It's a ritual. It's got to be put there. Now, you don't spell it out. You don't say what divine providence means to you or anything like that. And if you find that you have a sectarian candidate running for office, then you don't vote for him. If that's going to really influence how he deals with the democratic process in this government.
There's a fallacy, I think, in the way the question is posed.
Oh, maybe so.
Because we assume in this country, erroneously, that we can compartmentalize everything. So we're religious at home, and then we're pretty good secular citizens at work. And it doesn't work that way, because we take our values with us wherever we go, spiritual or otherwise. So this person, he might have said he responded to the Pope, but he already has his values with him about capital punishment, etc., and maybe what he needed was an excuse. So rather than hide this thing in terms of, we're not really in office to reflect our own spiritual values, let's be just open about it. We all have our beliefs. Let's say what our beliefs are on these issues and let the people choose.
I really don't... I agree with Azizah. I think there's three possibilities with this governor here. One is that he really reached an inner conviction that he needed to pardon this man, and the Pope is an excuse. The second is that he did it simply for political purposes, and the Pope is an excuse. And the third is that the Pope is running this man. And, all three are matters of possibility and fact. All three occur every day in the political scene. And the fact that it's the Pope that's running the man, if it is, doesn't irritate me any more than some of the other people I see running this government.
But I would observe, and this may sound inappropriate, but I really have a problem with religious leaders. No, what I mean by that is religious leaders in a lot of ways, religious leaders have been religiously racist, religiously bigoted, religiously sexist, religiously materialistic, religiously classist, that at some point, I think it goes back to what I think in some ways everybody has said, at some point it's beyond religion to what are my core values. And when do I stop saying code words that for expediency and at some point say, this is what claims me. This is what guides my existence. Now, doctors, I don't know, can they say that without losing?
Say what?
What their real core values are.
In terms of religion? You mean in terms of religion or in terms of basic humanistic?
I want to say in terms of faith. I think religion,
right.
As we get into all these...
You see, I think one of the issues that we have going all evening is the issue of vocabulary. And we're using a lot of words without defining them. We don't have much choice unless we're going to stay all night. But one of those words is the word secular. Now, my vocabulary word that might be synonymous with the way you're using secular is humanistic. And the core values of humanistic core values is what I want to see in my leaders, in my political leaders. They are what I want to see in myself. And I fall short every day of those core values, which are humanistic. They are the humanistic values that our framers presented. They are in the Federalist Papers. They are in all kinds of documents, which I wish were a part of the curriculum of every school in the country. Instead of hanging up 10 commandments all the time, let's go back and look at those. Whatever happened to civics? No, I feel so old-fashioned. I remember taking civics, and I remember falling in love with my country in a variety of ways, in so many different ways. Those are core values that we must talk about and read about and study in our schools to be good Americans. That's the goal. If we're going to have any kind of an ideological goal in the public school system, let it be the goal of being good, patriotic, loyal Americans.
But that...
I'm just going to, because I'm a radio person, I have my eye on the clock here, and I would like the audience to start participating in this discussion now. If anybody's interested in coming up to the mics up here and asking a question of any of our panelists. If you don't get up here soon, I'm going to read another one of those case studies, so better. But if you do come up, remember that you have to speak into the microphone because we are being recorded, and this is going to be broadcast on your local public radio station. WCVE FM.
I think that the story about the governor is lacking something. You're assuming he's a Catholic. He was a Protestant. In fact, I think he was a Baptist. So it wasn't the idea of a pope addressing a Catholic parishioner. It was the idea of a man who did not believe in capital punishment, the pope, who came from a country that does not allow capital punishment, unlike the United States and unlike Virginia. And I think it's a disgrace we have capital punishment in the United States, and particularly in Virginia, where we should have the love of country and the love of human beings. And I think that should be made clear. I don't know. Do you assume he was a Catholic? Did you think he was running, that the Pope was running the man because he was a Catholic?
I did not.
Was that his objection?
I wasn't assuming that.
I don't know. No.
I think it was, well...
Actually, I was assuming that there was a congruence of values, that this person did not believe in capital punishment, perhaps, and needed some encouragement from the Pope. He doesn't have to be Roman Catholic. I wanted to say that to go to the civic agreement, as you did, is really to just sidestep the issue. because we know our civic agreement. It's in the Constitution and a few other papers that you have mentioned. But the fact is, as this member of our audience mentions, you come to the situation laden with values you're brought up with. What our civic agreement says is that we will not impose these values without restraint on the others, but that we have some sort of a working agreement so that we can work together in the long run for the sake of our country. We do not come without values. The civic agreement only defines how much we can do with them.
All right, that's all. I wanted to make
Thank
sure
you.
that it was not as a Catholic parishioner, but as a human being and a citizen he was approached.
I think the conflict here, though, also comes in when a religious leader makes a direct plea like that to an American politician. You still, whether the politician is Catholic or not, it still puts into conflict that the values of religion versus secular society and
You know, I don't get that. I really think that's basically the proper relationship of religion to state.
Mm-hmm.
I think that
I agree.
that the sense of separation of church and state is that this church, various churches and religions and religious leaders should be able to speak to public issues without having the actual power in their own hands. And that's appropriate. It's not terribly bad. And we learn to either appreciate it or disregard it if we don't happen to admire the person who's speaking.
Well, I would say it's more than appropriate. It's very good. And I know that Ben and I and others have appeared before delegate committees and Senate committees of all kinds, appealing to them from our point of view as ministers, as theologians, whatever you want to call us, all of which assumes one thing in a democracy, and that is we've got to be intelligent. Now, that's a big assumption, I know. But intelligence is indispensable in a democracy. We have to understand each other, and we have to make up our own minds, and we have to say, I disagree with you, Pope, or whoever it is. Doesn't make any difference.
But all of this is appropriate if we have equal access in a pluralistic society. That's the key.
Yes. I would respectfully disagree with the theme of this panel. In the U.S., religion does not really affect politics, leadership, as much as race, ethnicity, or special interests, especially in Richmond. Yet, as someone who's lived in the Middle East, for example, the politics is defined by religion. For example, in certain countries, you can't be join their military if you're Sunni Muslim. Lebanon, for example, requires the prime minister to be Sunni Muslim. Oh, in certain countries it's Shiite Muslim. Lebanon requires the prime minister to be Sunni Muslim. Certain Middle Eastern countries make certain religions illegal. And my question is, do you agree? And also, doesn't this imply that these divisions, diversity are arbitrary? By the way, just in the Middle East, for example, race a lot of times is totally irrelevant. Black, white is totally irrelevant, so there's a plus there. And that sort of makes me seem that many of these diversities and divisions may be arbitrary that we're talking about.
Let me just address the question of Lebanon, for example. The president is required by law to be Christian. And the reason we have this division of religious functions is really a heritage of the French mandate. It was not like that until they worked it out to ensure that there will always be a divided government, and therefore Lebanon would be easy to manipulate. Let me go now to the other question, which is religion and ethnicity in this country. That, you know, in this country we're more interested in issues of race and ethnicity than we are with religion. From my point of view as a Muslim, I do not see the distinction you're drawing. One of the people that I have met and admired a great deal, because actually the picture of him that I hold in my memory is quite different from what you read in the papers, is Malcolm X, who visited Lebanon, and who told me that in the early days he used to look at whites as the devil itself, that the blacks and the whites could never reconcile. It was just a very poor situation, and the white was the devil. Then he became a Muslim, went to pilgrimage in Mecca, and he sat there and he was eating from a common dish, and the guy across from him was a white with blue eyes. And then it dawned on him that we are all God's children. And from that day on, he never thought of the white man as the devil. And so I can show you how religion brings us together if we really take it into our hearts the way God intended for us to believe.
I would just like to say in the case of our region and our area, I think that we are deceived if we think the racial and cultural issues don't speak at the heart of a religious issue. That some of the divisions that we see racially and by class and by culture, they are supported, maintained, endorsed, and buttressed by a certain religiosity.
I wonder if you can, I'm interested in what you're saying in more specific.
I firmly believe that at the heart of how we interrelate, that one of the ways we challenge that is at the level of authentic spirituality. And when my own religiosity allows me to maintain, condone, and support the separation, negation, diminution of the value of persons, and allows me in a either stolid, callous, or intentional way to maintain and support structures that engender division and separation in the community, then the key thing that makes me comfortable in what I do is having a divine sanction for what I do, or having God legitimate what I do. And I believe that you can never separate the major divisions that exist in most of our communities from Sunday morning. And I say that from a Christian standpoint. I know there are others who do not worship on Sunday. But I don't think, and I think again, it's an issue of compartmentalizing. Like over here, this has nothing to do, this is just politics. At some point, all of that for me comes together. And the more I experience it and see it and walk in it, I see how powerful religion is in maintaining it.
If I can just ask a follow-up, I know you've been staying there, but we haven't talked about the fact that there is a religious right movement in this country. There is a movement which calls itself the Christian Coalition or the Christian Right, and is seeking political power. And it seems right now to be not in a particularly strong position, or certainly not as strong as it was 4 years ago in the last election, but we're talking about religious people who are actively seeking power. And isn't that something different from simply people living out their religious values in their political life?
Well, often you hear people from the religious right saying to what I guess we could call the religious left, not the religious wrong. And it's just what I said before. I mentioned Ben because I know Ben, and we have appeared in different kinds of governmental situations where we are speaking about Planned Parenthood, pro-choice, whatever it may be, from our point of view, and they say, well, you're doing it, aren't you? You're trying to influence the government, aren't you? But just because we take a different position, you're saying we're interfering with the state from the point of view of religion. Well, it doesn't work out exactly like that. And it's very difficult to even articulate it, but what we do see over and over again, I think, is the difference between influencing and imposing. And I think there is a major radical difference between the two. And twisting arms and that kind of thing, and manipulating in a variety of ways. There is a major difference between that. And what I'm doing when I try to do things like that, because I love my country, I want to improve my country in every way I can, I want to use my own values to try to do that, I come from, I think, a patriotic position rather than from a biblical position. Well, because I hear God's voice from Mount Sinai. That's very dangerous. But I try to do it from the point of view of my American values, and I do believe to be a good Jew means to be a good American. And so it's trying to influence on the basis of what I consider to be humanistic for our nation, humanistic for every community. I think there's a major difference.
Let me say that as a Christian, it is very uncomfortable to me to have a particular political group of people describe their position as the Christian position. I find that personally offensive. I find it theologically very dangerous. And since I know many of these people and pray with many of them, incidentally, some whose spirituality I greatly respect and some whom I think are simply using this as a way of kind of getting political manipulation. I was brought up in my theological training and to believe that one of the mysteries of human life is that Christians may find themselves on different sides of political issues. And I think that's a rather important thing to maintain. And I am extremely uncomfortable with the adoption of a series of positions, calling them the Christian positions in politics. Some of them are quite un-Christian to me, but I don't feel like I have the right to claim that my position is the only Christian position.
You know, I just want to say one thing. While I agree with what you have said, some of what you have said on the Christian right, I'm really bothered by the emphasis of the media on the Christian right.
Yes, me too.
Because why haven't they talked about secular fundamentalists who have been grabbing for power for many years in this country? We don't focus on that, but when somebody, a person of faith, starts talking about power, the media focuses on it.
There is a real targeting of the Christian right by the media, which is also very wrong in this situation. And it's kind of a whipping boy that's not right.
Well, I won't go there. Please do. No, this gentleman's been waiting a long time.
It's fascinating. It's stand here all night. I'd like the panel to address an area of religion in our society that, in my sense of things, is much more powerful than government, is our corporate society. It's fun to talk about religion and politics, but in the last 20 years or so, or something, since I've been kind of looking at this, is that there's no question in my mind on a worldwide basis, the influence that influences our lives in all kinds of ways is our kind of consumer corporate world. And it seems to me that religion and our religious leaders have been a little reluctant to talk about the application of religious principles, beliefs, or values as applied to that. And I'm not making any quick answers or assumptions here, but I would be fascinated to hear some of your thoughts about that.
The religious leaders aren't the only ones who've been unwilling to talk about it. The political establishment has completely laid down in front of the basic domination of this country by Wall Street for the last 20 years. It's a very strange thing that's happened in this country, where there basically is no opposition and no criticism politically of the economic system, and has not been for the last 20 years. I think when the Russians decided to call it quits, you know, the real issue in America is not whether or not to be capitalist, but what kind of capitalism we're supposed to have here. And that issue has not been joined. There's too much money going around right now, and it's made everybody be quiet. And I expect it's made a lot of the, I don't know, Jack, I don't make my money off religion, do you?
I'm not answering.
I got
This could be on the radio.
Let me make another disclosure in my attempt to answer your question. I'm actually the person who teaches corporate law at the law school. I also worked 7 years on Wall Street. And I'd like you to know that recently there has been a serious movement in law schools, in the community, and on Wall Street, where we meet all together with the various legal eagles or business people to talk about spirituality. People on Wall Street and elsewhere, some of them are fed up with the kind of life they're leading. People in Silicon Valley are also fed up. I just met somebody a few weeks ago who left a major Silicon Valley company, And he could have done exactly the same on his own to make a lot of money. And he told me, he said, I stopped and asked myself, how could I still have fun and do something of service to the community? He said, I can make money any way I go, but let me do it well this time by watching the environment, by watching the community. Now, what I wanted to tell you is that a lot of people, for example, the lawyers on Wall Street, there is such a high turnover rate. They're unhappy. It's really not about money, you discover once you start making the money. It doesn't make you happy. And for this reason, Fordham University has put together several, actually, conferences and continues. I was asked to write about my experience, and I wrote a paper called On Being a Muslim Corporate Lawyer. And it's published in Texas Tech. We are struggling with these issues, and we think religion has a place in the workplace, has a place in our relationships with people in business. And with some encouragement, I hope you will see some results.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, I'd like to just say one quick word, if I may. I know very little about it, but I'll say a word anyway. In terms of the corporate structure of the world today, I think that we can say it's characterized by the globalization of capitalism, which is a book that maybe you've seen. Friedman has just written that book. Thomas, is it? I think it's Tom Friedman, yes. And one of the things, which is probably a secondary value and certainly not necessarily one of the ultimate or primary goals of CEOs all over the world, in my opinion anyway, is that it's made the world interdependent. We even have a good expression for it, WWW, World Wide Web. We're all in the web. We're all intertwined. And with all its faults and flaws and defects, I think corporate global capitalism will probably assure us of peace more effectively in the unforeseen future. I can't foresee anything in the future, so there's no point in saying unforeseen. But anyway, in the future than anything else that I can think of. We are interdependent. European Union, the Eurodollar, the Middle East, probably in the next 50 years, will be another community which is based on economic interdependence, or will be.